So I'm Yann Toutan, CEO of Blackwinch, and very pleased today to have you join us for this product as a service models, what the Big Four won't tell you. Today's webinar is all about diving into the real world of product as a service. And I promise you, it's going to be a conversation full of insights and inspirations and takeaways. So during this webinar, our panelists will share insights into areas such as operations or funding or circularity for the PaaS models. And at Blackwinch, we view these domains as part of what we refer to the as a service infinite loop, which is the methodology that we have developed to implement and scale as a service with a holistic view. We will use this as a red line in this webinar. So enough, let's get started. We are going to start with the ignition point. So each of our panelists have started one day their product as a service journey, for each of them a unique reason. Did it come from a strategic choice, or it was driven by a customer request, or to position their solution against competition? Let's get starting with you, E-Lin. How does it apply to your appliance as a service offer? What was the ignition point?
Basically, it's trend scouting, right? Like all things innovation. So it's the consumer trend that we saw across the globe and across industries, which is access over ownership. Right, so that was a main trigger to see what kind of new business model innovations we could stay relevant to our consumers. And of course, for us was a very important point about the circular model of our as a service, right? So we also take back the appliance and refurbish it, and that is the other aspect, which is strategic, and the matter of staying in touch with the consumer to stay relevant and to continuously innovate our offering, be it product or service. This were all the trigger points why, BlueMovement was born.
Yeah, okay, thanks, E-Lin. Indeed, sustainability and circularity is a point we're going to address later on. Very important in as a service business models. David, how did it work for you for cooling as a service at Kaer? What was the ignition point?
So for us, it was really customers weren't telling us they wanted cooling as a service, but the way they were reacting to what we were saying, it was pretty clear that they did. So we kept talking about air conditioning and how fantastic it was and how we could do things better and how we could, decarbonize cooling. And they, this is 15 years ago, they didn't really care that much. And they kept wanting to talk about their business and not really dive into the details of cooling. And we said, no, you've got to get interested, and we can do this for you, and we can say this technology and these chillers. And they didn't get excited when we talked about air conditioning systems. So it became quite apparent that we loved air conditioning, but we didn't own any air conditioning systems. They owned air conditioning systems, but didn't love air conditioning. So instead of trying to get them to love it, we decided maybe if we owned the assets, that would be an easier way to move forward. So it was really understanding that customers may not love your product as much as you do, but they might love the output that it brings. And therefore, we moved to servitization for that reason.
Outcome-based model, indeed, yeah. Providing an outcome and a performance instead of specs. Bas, Daniel, Pierre-Yves, any other points you would like to add on the ignition point?
Yeah, sure. If you want me, I'm in the cinema business for Barco. So for us, it was a business which highly subjected to renewal waves. So for us, it was a bit difficult. We have a lot of income in the first couple of years. Then we have less incomes because the products, they will last for another 10 years. And then we have another big chunk of revenues coming up. But for our customers, that was also a problem, of course, because they had a lot of investment in the first couple of years, then a lot of nothing. And then they have to invest again in a lot of quite expensive equipment. So there we came up to a sweet spot, I would say, where we co-created this model where we had a need to flatten out our incomes and they had a need to flatten out their outgoes. So it was a win-win situation in order to support technological innovation, actually.
Thank you, Bas. Thanks. From a pure markets perspective, there's also some drivers, and I would love to hear your insights, Michael, about the fact that in the subscription economy that you closely observe, there are studies that have been published with Zuora and thematics asset management, that indicate a strong correlation between inflation and OpEx models that can be achieved thanks to product as a service. Could you give a bit more detail on this driver from the market?
Absolutely, Jan. So subscription economy, right? Going down physical products, leasing economy becoming more flexible. And these two markets, they're colliding somehow to create this more agile, customer-centric solutions. Leasing market is about $1.6 trillion. It's growing 10%. Subscription economy, is 1 trillion, and it's growing about 11%. Intersection is what you're talking about, Jan. It's the equipment or product as a service market. It's still a small market, 1.5 billion, but it's growing at 50% year over year, and that's going to be the case until 2030. Now, to your question, when I worked with Noel from Natixis, what we found out is we run a correlation over 20 years of GDP, inflation, CapEx, OpEx, right? And we found two things to answer your question. One, OpEx spending is positively correlated with inflation. What does it mean? Higher inflation does not decrease OpEx, but in fact increases it. And second, OpEx isn't always tied to economic growth, especially in downturns. So if I keep it very simple, OpEx is more resilient. So that's your question. So now just add the fact, and we'll discuss it, deeper, recurring, real-time customer relationship in competitive markets. And that explains the rise of this kind of models, Jan. And that's what we're observing with you, Blackwinch, at our customers on a almost daily basis.
Indeed. Thanks, Michael, for those insights. I'd like now to turn to another point, which are operations. And let's say in operations, it's quite a vast topic, but we could say, for example, the administrative tasks behind the models that require very careful planning. So a key consideration is, for example, identifying the right moment to begin automating operations for scalability. Too early, too late. There's a very thin line here. When and how you can optimize tasks like billing and collecting, for example, to support your growth. Daniel, we had a lot of discussion about that. I'd love to hear your thought on this aspect when it comes to your healthcare as a service offer.
Thank you very much. So, of course, you have many points to automate. So from creating the right quotation to getting the right order to be automated to delivering your service to actually collecting the money. And of course, you can't do it all at once. It's a very heavy investment, and you don't also want to invest until you have a guarantee you have a success. And also you have a proper process to automate. The worst part is if you have a terrible process and you automate that terrible process, you will just live with that for the rest of your life. So we always recommend start with the most difficult one first, because that's the one that is burning most of your energy. And that is normally is the collection side. I mean, the way that you generate an invoice and start collecting money and making sure that invoice is bulletproof. It's audit proof, and everyone understand it's perfectly done and also with no error, because that can be a litigation that can also lead to churn. A lot of bad things can happen if you provide a wrong invoice. So this is where we will start from the end to make sure we have the right invoice, and then you walk backwards, because that's the one that gives you the most impact and most important also for the customers, and then you walk backwards to automate the others when you have enough business to support your next term of investment. That's or at least our recommendation.
Thank you, Daniel, for that. Pierre-Yves, how do you address this with your telco as a service offer at Alcatel Lucent Enterprise?
Thanks, Jan. Our first main target, actually, when we started looking at this, was to provide the maximum flexibility on pricing to the offer managers, right? Globally, we have various product lines in different business divisions internally, and they're all addressing different market segments potentially. So the idea was really to have the maximum flexibility on offer management and creation of those pricing, not thinking about the complexity behind of making it happen, but really thinking about how can I address this market segment with the best offer. We've experienced a lot of pain in the past implementing recurring services offerings like maintenance in CapEx oriented tools. And we really did not want to live that again. So transforming our products to product as a service at different pace, different constraints, depending on the product lines, was a long journey. So we wanted really to have this flexibility from the start. which in turn can become an asset and a differentiation factor when you price to different customers in different segments.
Flexibility of the pricing with as much standardization with flexibility.
Indeed.
That's the challenge. Marie-Neige, I think you have prepared a little poll for us. We can't hear you, Marie-Neige.
Yes, we'd like to understand the key challenges that you see when it comes to developing your as-a-service offer beyond the operations. So we launched a quick poll. If you click on the activity at the right bottom corner and you go to activities and poll, you should be able to vote and to see the question. So I give you everyone a few seconds to go through that. But basically, we'd like to know what's the most difficult? Is it more like the strategy, the marketing part, sales, funding, finance, ecosystem, or circularity? Because we see that as all the different aspects that need to be carefully planned. But it would be interesting to see your view and the disconnect that we see often between theory and practice. So I give a few more seconds for everyone to vote. It seems at the moment that funding is quite a challenge. And then we have finance as well. But let's give maybe 5 more seconds for everyone to vote. And then we can address that and see how we can tackle this. So maybe, yeah, I think we have a winner. It looks like funding is the most challenging part for everyone. So yeah, thanks for voting and quite an interesting insights to look at.
Great. So indeed, how to fund your as-a-service offer is a recurring question, and especially when it comes to scaling the model. Where are the assets? On which balance sheet do you manage the cash to order in a certain way? What is the associated revenue and margin recognition practice? That's a whole aspect. And within the product as a service ecosystem, banks play a crucial role to fuel the as a service models. So let's talk about funding now. Funding is one of the engines of any product as a service solution to be able to scale. For us, it's an essential component to make the model valuable and long-term lasting. So what is crucial is that you need to adapt your funding strategy also with the growth of your annual contract recurring value. So let's address all the panelists at one. Anyone within the panel who would like to express how they manage their funding strategy in order to create scalability? We have a bit of silence.
I can
you want
start
to
on this
start?
one
Yeah?
if you want.
It's such a difficult topic.
But yeah, well, as I mentioned, I mean, when we're an existing business with CapEx revenue, right? Obviously, you need to have a strategy to transform that revenue to recurring. And we had 3 different ways to go through that in looking at our offers. The first one was transforming CapEx offerings to recurring offerings. And obviously that goes over time and depending on the markets, but that's a transformation that takes time on your install base. The second strategy that we had was to create digital services on top of existing install base, which allows you to start creating your recurring revenue to cover for the transformation of the product as a service offerings. And the third one was to create the whole new offers, which were totally separated and probably oriented to verticals, let's say brand new service offerings that may include existing products, but in a brand new pricing. So these were the three strategies that we had, not to make a big bang at once, but really to try and plan ahead this transition of revenue and fund the rest, let's say.
Okay, yeah, indeed, thanks. Thanks, Pierre-Yves. Bas, I know we had those discussions during the podcast together about using external funds or using the company funds. Could you explain your strategy on this one?
Yes, we also had a bit of a dual strategy here. Sorry, it's just an ice cream car driving into the street. Now, we had a bit of a discussion internally indeed on how to fund this, because we are facing quite high value equipment also for our customers to invest. So we were, even if we keep it on our own balance, it's a lot of money there. So we set a part of our cash flow apart to support this business development, but we also looked into a third party, like an external financial partner, to help us overcome this hurdle of having the big amount of money on our balance, because we retain ownership of the equipment, of course. So now we have a large customer or multiple large customers where the equipment is actually owned by the third party, and where they also facilitate, of course, part of the invoicing and so on towards the end customer. It works very good for us.
So using external parties specialized in this matter.
Yes.
Other panelists, E-Lin, David?
Yeah, it's quite the same at BSH as Bas mentioned. So we, as BlueMovement, we are a corporate startup with end-to-end operational responsibilities, from sales and marketing to logistics, reverse logistics, etc. But of course, what does a corporate startup mean, right? So the funding is internal, and as an entrepreneur, you have your own challenges to say why this business, which is an investment right now, is still has the justification to exist, right? But the funding is internal and it's very heavy on capex, and therefore the cash flow is not sexy at all until you have the critical mass. We are actually in a phase where we need to grow faster in order to reach that critical mass so that we can fund ourselves. But at the same time, I'm also looking at another model where we partner a financial institute, and through their operational leasing, that they are able to improve our cash flow with the recurring revenue part right now on hold. When we fund ourselves, basically we get the monthly fees, and that's the recurring part, but our cash flow out is greater than our cash flow in. So when we have a financial institute behind, we get the full contract value in day one. Therefore, the contract or the cash flow is much sexier. But we would then want to see how we take care of the recurring revenue part, potentially splitting the huge asset which has the higher cost of goods sold, comparing to maybe some other services or consumables. Maybe we'll talk about it in the ecosystem strategy. And therefore, we could hopefully cut the cake and eat it too, right? So that's the general idea.
Yeah.
So for us, we decided to create a hybrid system. So we actually divided what we normally offer as one product to the customer as two chunks. So first is the hardware that behave almost like the PC that we are selling to them. And then the subscription or the recurring is on the software, on the services, and also on the consultancy that we help them to continue, standardizing their operation, also improving the operation. So the value they get is actually on their own KPI improvements. So the hardware, actually, we do not own it. So actually the cash flow is well controlled because we ask the customer to buy it, or they lease it, or whatever. They use their own financial solution to do that. And they can also depreciate that over time using their tax, because hardware, like a desktop table, you can actually depreciate over tax. Software, you cannot. Service, you cannot. That's why the subscription makes sense for them. Yeah.
Very clear, Daniel. I think this illustrates, in 4 testimonials, the vast range of funding possibilities within the product as a service model. Just a little bit of publicity here, but Michael and myself, we have wrote a white paper on this topic, which is called The Secrets of Physical Product as a Service. And it can be found on the BlackWinch and Zuora's website, but also we will share the link in the chat if you want to deep dive this matter. To take the bridge that you offered to me, E-Lin, we're going to talk now about the ecosystem. And I think we can all agree that building a good ecosystem is key in the product as a service model. Companies don't have to go for it on their own. E-Lin, Pierre-Yves, and David, you have mentioned in our podcast working with partners to enhance the offerings. Can you share now how these partnerships contribute to your success? E-Lin, would you like to start on appliances as a service?
Sure. So there are two elements, right? One is partnering throughout the industrial value chain, right? So one key element is where we are not the best. For example, the ID and credit check to check the financial soundness of our end consumer or customer. That's not our core competence at BSH Home Appliances, right? The home appliance bit is definitely our core competence, but that's where partners come in, right? So we actually use partners along the value chain, but the product as a service ecosystem that I'm really keen on is truly what additional value can we create, right, for our end consumer who subscribes with us. So the appliance, let's say the washing machine or dishwasher, is basically, like, in my opinion, like a bridge into this relationship with the end consumer. But at the end of the day, to use this dishwasher, the consumer actually has to have the detergent, has to have the descaler, has to have electricity, etc. And therefore, if we can package it as a deal together, like a single point of contact or a total cost of ownership viewpoint. But then again, we are not the best to bring to the party the detergent, the electricity, etc. And therefore, through the power of partnering, we can actually create more value and capture the value as a ecosystem of partners. So that's how I think that we can all together create a bigger pie.
Mm-hmm. The importance of going as a team. Pierre-Yves, how does it work for you in telco as a service offer?
Yeah, so we have a business model which is 100% direct through partners, and I think what we had really to do is to make those recurring models possible for all this chain of partners. And so we focused on two main aspects. Let's say the first one is that when you have CapEx products on site at customers, it may happen that they are not connected. So we spent a good time building our digital capabilities to better know our customers through data. And that involved quite a mix of internal skills and data lifecycle platforms with partners on this side. And the second aspect that we focused on was the market capabilities. How do we monetize? How do we push forward that value chain in an indirect model? How do we onboard people inside and in our partners? And how do we manage the subscription quote to cash and finance in an indirect business model? And on this last element, we partnered with Zuora to really understand the impacts of a recurring model on our operations and implement these necessary building blocks, let's say, to be efficient quite early and be able to accelerate, which we're still going on.
Thank you, Pierre. David, when it comes to calling as a service, I'm sure you don't work on your own and you engage with a large amount of partners to make it happen.
Yeah, I think for us, there's really two parts to it. There's the easy part. So when it comes to cooling, it's a very fragmented sort of supply chain. So you have the consultants and the designers, you have the construction companies and the builders, you have testing commissioning agents, you have operating companies, service and maintenance companies, repair companies. And essentially what you're doing is, instead of the customer being responsible for orchestrating all of that, it now goes to the as a service provider to orchestrate all of that. So I think there's a bit of education around how people you used to go and pitch with and next to and sometimes against are now your customers. So you're working and putting their things together for an end client. And that, I think, takes a bit of education around, we're not competing anymore, we're actually working together. And I'm, as a service provider, I'm bringing your technology to customers and I can do that effectively for you. So that's one part. I think the other part is really understanding how your as a service offering expands the partners that you need. So we talked a little bit about financing. So you need to have banking relationships and investors and things that you manage, and you bring them along and educate them as to what you're doing and why that's important. But I think you also need to learn what are these areas of expertise that you don't have. They weren't core to your business before. So we're an air conditioning company. We were great at air conditioning, but we weren't great at customer experience in terms of applications on their phones so they could use our service. Pierre mentioned data and how they can actually access their data and use that. So we then need to build relationships with data analysts and data visualization software. And then there's a mix of what do you create for yourself and what do you buy off the shelf, and how can you sort of integrate those together. So I think for me, that was the most important part. And that was the most exciting stuff for our customers, which is, okay, there's now this whole other part of your ecosystem, which you didn't have before, which can actually make a huge difference to how your customers perceive your service.
Thanks, David. Indeed, very spot on when it comes to bringing the ecosystem all together. And of course, there's a point attached to it, is the capacity of pricing this whole ecosystem. And Michael, you have recently conducted a research on we're gonna take a stretch here, but monetization of generative AI. And you mentioned to me that there are unexpected connections with product as a service in your findings. Will you share us?
You bet, Jan. So 70 offers, and you're gonna find an interesting linkage here. So generative AI it's forcing the way software companies have to sell. They've been selling by user mostly, right, for decades. But there's two forcing functions. For the first time, generative AI actually can reduce most, if not all, the users that are needed. So if you price per user, you're pretty much shooting yourself in the foot. Second, every single generative AI query called inference has a linear cost, right? While SaaS had almost like a plateauing cost. So that's why generative AI has 10 to 3 points lower gross profit margin, which is interesting. So what does it mean? It means that generative AI and SaaS have to create new metrics. They're creating, in fact, digital workers. And these digital workers, they outsource a process, similarly as what you're doing with product as a service when you think of it. And you have to value it this way. So that's the first time, in fact, in SaaS, and I work quite a lot in SaaS, that I hear talking about cost plus, which is not a surprise for your ear. And a company like Intercom in the software space, they're not charging 99 cents per closed ticket response of their software. So think of it, it's a support software, and they charge you not on the user, but based on the successful responses they gave. It's only 6% of the offers that I studied that are outcome-based, but the surprising development, Jan, is that SaaS has been the benchmark for industry, but for the first time, the benchmark for software when it comes to monetization might become you and not the Silicon Valley. So we're moving as well in the software space into the models that we've been experiencing in manufacturing for quite a bit of time now. If that makes sense.
Interesting move when manufacturing inspiring SaaS. E-Lin, already at the introduction of at the start of this webinar, you talked about sustainability and how as a service model can contribute to it. In a podcast, each of you has touched in different ways. E-Lin, you talked about extending the life of appliances. David, you mentioned modular design for cooling systems. Bas, you've highlighted the environmental benefit of laser projectors. And Pierre-Yves, you've discussed energy efficiency. So how do those practices align with your vision of a sustainable future? E-Lin, you want to start on that?
Sure. So in the home appliance industry, so BSH is one of the leaders, the European leader. And therefore, sustainability is really core to our strategy and way forward, right? So to understand how we can play our part, sustainability is not only for the extension of lifetime of the asset, so not only the planet element, but also the society, right? So I think that's quite beautiful for both sides. So basically, to get a Bosch or Siemens home appliance, perhaps it's premium and it's efficient, but not everybody can afford it. And by chunking it down to monthly fees, affordable fixed monthly fees, we are actually able to access more consumers. That's what's in it for the company. So new consumers who in the future potentially would buy or stay loyal to renting from us, right? So that's and the beauty for society, it's like we're making our efficient appliances accessible, affordable to more people. So I think that's very beautiful, right? So it's a win-win on that element. On the side of the asset, so for the planet, because we actually bring the appliance from our fleet direct from manufacturer to the consumer, consumer gives us back after a certain period of time. We refurbish it to as good as new. Through this process, we are actually able to now substantiate it. When we talked, it was not substantiated by an independent neutral party, that we can extend the asset lifetime by up to 20%. So that's also very exciting. With that, we can actually play our little part also on the planet element. But the beauty is that through this recurring relationship with the consumer, we learn how to, we also educate them to maintain the appliance better. Of course, we incentivize them. But through this learning, we actually have a closed loop on knowledge as well. When we build the next product platform, we're actually able to make it better for repairability, better for durability, etc., etc. So I think from these various elements of society as well as planet, it makes sense as well to us.
Thanks, E-Lin. David, when it comes to cooling, which is of course high in energy consumption, how the as a service model can contribute to make it more sustainable?
So I think in terms of sustainability, if you have an expert delivering an outcome and using the best technology that they can, essentially they have access to a lot more knowledge and technology than end users generally do. The burden of being sustainable is now put on the person who's in the best position to do it. I think that's one point. But when you talk about circularity and some of these other things around sustainability, having a portfolio of customers makes a massive difference. So once it unlocks a lot of things that you can't do if you're a single customer. So buildings change, the requirements change over time. We saw that a lot during COVID. We saw that a lot now. So data centers are requiring more cooling. The way we use offices and shopping malls is changing, so they might need more or less. So if you're one asset, there's not a lot you can do. You've got a cooling system, you're locked into it. You can either throw it away and put on a new one, but that's not very good for sustainability. If you have multiple buildings, you can move things around. So you kind of talked about this at the beginning where we design modularly. We don't have fixed assets to buildings, which is what in the old model you have to. You'd have chillers that are on buildings. Now we can take them out and move them around, and that gives you a lot more flexibility to be sustainable and be fit for purpose for the duration of the building's life cycle, as opposed to designing it now, building it now, and hoping it's fit for purpose for the next 15 years and putting up with whatever performance you can get for the next 15 years.
Indeed, very obvious, David. Thanks for that. Of course, what is important is to measure success when it comes to as a service. And we often have the question is how good looks like, how do you measure your ambition? Most of the time we hear about churn rate, renewal rate, but do you track any specific ones? So what good looks like for you? What are the KPIs you use to measure your successes in as a service? Pierre-Yves, you mentioned the model of a land, adopt, expand, renew. I love this part in our podcast. Are those KPIs you measure?
Yeah, indeed, the land model, as you mentioned, so for land, adopt, expand, renew, very much applies to our business with our channels, actually. And it's a good transition, actually, from a CapEx approach, right? But clearly, we have to transition as well to typical financial metrics of the recurring revenue, like MRR, monthly recurring revenue, annual recurring revenue, churn rate, obviously, which are helping us driving our business. And in our market transformation from premise to cloud, we also follow metrics around customer retention, net new customers, because there is a transition happening in communications for enterprises, right? From premise to cloud, and from capex to opex, obviously. And in that, we are also still using, let's say, some historical KPIs that we used to measure things like decades, like ARPU, average revenue per user. We are very much user-oriented pricing industry, and this is still valid in recurring, right? So it helps us understand also how the markets are evolving in the different countries we address, allowing us to also understand, if we should accelerate or not accelerate this transition for our business and for our margins.
Daniel, I know you're very strong on your KPIs to measure the value of the value creation of your offers. Could you share with us some of them?
Yes, so we base our pricing model on per patient bed. So per bed that has the patient occupied in a day. So measuring that average price, per patient is very important. So we also look at the number of patients that can transfer through the system is very important, because that's where we generate our revenue, and that's also our common interest with the hospital. And the hospital also want to have more patients passing through that system, because that is where they generate their revenue, because every patient come with a DRG and they get the reimbursement from the government and all that. So this is really, we track more and more the customer side KPI more than our internal KPI, because for us, churn is not an option. I mean, maybe most of the customers are individual customers, our customers are B2B, so we work with big hospital chains, and they subscribe a lot of monitor at the same time, and they churn all of them at the same time if they don't like us. So there's no, I mean, measuring churn is not an option because it's too late. And we are talking about maybe, millions of euro per year possibility to churn at one time. So we absolutely need to make sure that we measure the delivered value, because that's the reason why the customer continue to subscribe our services. And if we don't deliver value, the moment we stop delivering value, that's the moment we expect a churn. And this is why we measure more the KPI in our customer side than internal to Philips. A
proactive measurement.
Yes, the leading
of healthcare, care and not cure.
Yeah.
Michael, would you like to enrich the discussion with the ongoing KPIs that you see as the key ones in the subscription economy?
Absolutely. So those that were mentioned by Pierre-Yves and Daniel, spot on. On the side note, these KPIs, some of them, such as annual recurring revenue, start to be disclosed by companies like Schneider Electric, Honeywell, NCR, Philips on their annual reports. So even though they're not, GAAP metrics per se. Now, beyond this ones we mentioned, I think there's two families we need to discuss. One is the relationship between the cost of acquisition and the lifetime value, because in this business, as Daniel mentioned, the cost of acquisition and the margins are tightly linked, and you're going to take time to recoup sometimes just the cost of acquisition. So if you don't manage to sustain this relationship, you're going to lose money on every single account. And that's where I see a lot of manufacturing companies making mistakes, trying to sell to everyone. So that's one important family. So the relationship between cost of acquisition and lifetime value of the contract. And second is what we call the net dollar retention rate, which essentially is the ability to retain and expand your customer base. That's the organic growth of the customer base. And again, this is where I see a lot of room for growth to manufacturing, because manufacturing companies are really good at lending, but they're not that good most of the time in terms of expansion motion, cross-sell and upsell, sometimes for the digital and the service parts, right? Not more hardware, and we talk about expanding the services. So that's what I would mention, Jan. And the last point is, to Daniel's point, when you're starting, it's absolutely critical not to focus on those, but to focus on leading indicators, user-based metrics, in order to demonstrate early sign of success, adoption, and customer value. If you don't do that, it's going to be too late when you start having the recurring metrics, because it takes years to get those metrics meaningful.
It's good we have some alignment between the panelists. Starting to head towards the conclusion, I have one final question for all of you. And that's the following one. What is the most valuable insights you wish you had before launching or scaling your as a service solution? What is your main takeaway? If you could offer advice to your past self to simplify the journey, what would that be in one sentence? E-Lin, we let you start.
Yeah, so I had the pleasure to take over this business, right? So, reflecting, I think it started with sustainability underlined, but I believe that a balanced approach. So, yes, sustainability, people, planet, but also prosperity. So the business element, the increasing the pie for access to new consumers, the recurring revenue, sustaining the business through tough times when consumer spending is shaky. I think the balanced approach is really the way: people, planet, and prosperity.
Lovely, thanks. Bas, what would be your takeaway?
Yes, well, my takeaway, and I think we cannot mention it enough here, is that you really have to step away from product thinking. None of our customers is in the business of owning a projector, so to say. They all in the business of selling tickets and popcorn. So that means that if you want to bring value to a customer, your value is not in owning the hardware, but the value is what do you offer for your customers that help them be successful in their business. And that in our case, well, for example, is uptime or a certain performance that helps your customer be happy. So focus on the things that are important and what are of value of your customer instead of your classical thinking of how you can monetize on hardware sales. I think that would be my takeaway for the audience here.
Yeah, user-centric and not product-centric. David, what would be your takeaway?
So I agree with the comments of the earlier panelists, 100%. I think for me, it's really the learning was around digitalization. I wish I'd known this before, which is we get so distracted and excited by the shiny app on the phone, but actually that's 5% of your digital transformation journey. There's 95% of it, which is your data transformation. How do you collect data accurately, verify it, and have it in relevant formats? And that's really boring and not sexy at all to talk about. But once you do that, then you can build apps and customer experiences super easy. But that is really, really expensive and really important and not very exciting. But focus on that, because once you do it, everything opens up. So that would be my key outtake.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Daniel, what would be your advice?
So if you have a chance to have market research, talking to real customers, understanding their pain and also their perception of the value you deliver, do it as early as possible. I mean, we did it quite late, so there's too many debates internally, very difficult discussions. If we already have the customer, insight from the beginning, those debates can be avoided, and time to market will be a lot faster because actually customers love it, and also they are willing to pay the price we want them to pay. But we know it at the very end, rather at the very beginning.
Start with the customer requests.
We started with the customer, but we did not do the scale research, which is what is recommended.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Pierre-Yves, the last one to give your advice.
Yeah, thanks, Jan. I think I echo a little bit the panelists because I think going to as a service offerings is a great opportunity to be closer to your customers. We measured it 10 years ago when we started. We were 14 layers between the developer and the user, which is way too much. And I would not insist enough on the data, like David, right? Knowing your customers, but just how they connect to your products, how they use them. We are in an indirect model, and I would have a lot pushed more on this direction of collecting the data, understanding them better, just so that you can actually make offers that are very specific to verticals and segments that customers are operating in. So that would have been an acceleration that would have done much greater.
14 layers, from developers to end user. I recall that from a podcast. That has to be shortened. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for sharing those practical tips. We are a little bit beyond the time that we had planned. Marie-Neige, I'm going to you if we can extend 1 or 2 minutes and to take some questions if we have some questions from the audience.
Yes, so we have one. I'm going to read it out, but what is the percentage value of additional services packed into the recurring rate for your product as a service? It was in the question form, so I don't know who wants to take this one. Maybe a few of you.
I think it could be a good one for Pierre-Yves, for example. The amount of services versus the amount of product in your as a service offer.
Yeah. So our environment and our products are very much changing to software. So I think it's difficult to give a percentage, but it's definitely growing. Meaning the percentage of services and software inside the recurring rate of our products as a service is definitely increasing versus hardware as we go, and just the same way as well. I mean, we're not selling the same hardware when we move to cloud versus on-premise products. I think it's now way below. I mean, the hardware revenue is way below 40% of this product as a service, and it's going down.
Daniel, for you, it's not a question because I would say it's 100% services and software.
100% service, especially on the professional service, on ability to collect data, helping them to improve their operation, and also the way they generate more patients, and all this is actually the core part of the offer. So that is the biggest part. Yeah.
Thank you, Daniel. Marina, should we take another question and one last question to respect the timing?
We don't have any other questions, but I saw that Bas, you raised your hand. Maybe you want to complement the answer.
Yeah, maybe. I think we know each other as Stijn there, but I think the value of services is almost 100% because that's kind of the definition of the as a service business. But I think the good thing is when you do this, a lot of it is tailor-made in our case, right? There is not such thing as one size fits all in an as a service offering. So when you talk with your customers, in one hand, I think the share of hardware, or how you call it, would be more, and the share of services is less. It really depends on what the needs and the values that you want to offer to your customer. And I don't think you can put a fixed percentage on this. And I would really encourage you to co-create with your customer what is the best offer between the two of you. And if you can fulfill that need, then if you golden ticket.
It's good to talk about the golden ticket when you're talking about cinema as a service. Great. Well, I think we've covered a lot of valuable ground today, and thanks to our panelists. Thank you very much. When we talked about appliances, telco, cinema, cooling, or healthcare as a service. So sure, we have touched clear and actionable insights. I hope you found both inspiration and practical ideas to fuel your product as a service journey. Now it's time to take what you've learned and start applying these strategies to your own offerings. And remember, transformation takes time, but if you do it with the right steps, the insights that you've learned today can lead to very good outcomes. So thank you everyone for your time, your attention, and your engagement today. Let's continue to push the boundaries, raise standards, and drive progress towards greater sustainability, customer satisfaction, and more resilient business models, thanks to as a service. Thank you, everyone.